my fiancée said. If we don't invite my ex, then the wedding stops making sense. So I silently left and canceled everything. The next morning, I woke up to 68 missed messages, and her last one said, "Well, screw you. I'm going back to my ex." That's when I decided to. When I think back to the week, everything fell apart. The moment that still sits like a weight in my chest is strangely quiet. There was no screaming, no shattered glasses, no doors slamming hard enough to shake the walls. Just a conversation at our dining table, a wedding binder between us, and a sentence from Marina that split my understanding of the last 2 years into before and after. We were finalizing the guest list. I had been paying for most of the wedding since her parents insisted they could only contribute a symbolic amount. I didn't mind covering the rest because I believed I was building something stable with someone who wanted the same future. I'd already paid deposits for the venue, the catering, and the photographer. Even the early honeymoon booking had gone on my card. I told myself it was normal for one partner to carry a bit more weight if they earn more. Marina always said she appreciated it. That evening, though, her gratitude looked more like entitlement. She tapped her pen against the page and said she needed to add one more name. I assumed it was a distant cousin or a childhood friend she'd forgotten. Instead, she wrote Calvin with a smooth, practiced movement that made me feel I was the last to know he mattered. I recognized the name only vaguely, mostly from offhand mentions about her previous job. She once said he hurt her when they dated years ago, but they stayed colleagues afterward because avoiding him would be complicated. I hadn't thought much about it. Everyone has a past, and as long as the present is honest, I didn't care. But the way she placed his name on the line, centered, deliberate, with a little flourish at the end, made me pause. I asked why he needed to be there. She slid the binder toward me and said the wedding wouldn't make sense without him. She said it the way someone explains a simple fact, as if this were an obvious truth and I had somehow overlooked it. She went on about how seeing her get married would be symbolic closure because he once broke things off suddenly and she wanted him to witness that she had outgrown the version of herself he undervalued. She framed it as some kind of emotional milestone. But underneath her words, something sharper pulsed. She didn't want closure. She wanted an audience. And not just any audience. An audience that once rejected her. There was something unsettling in how much significance she placed on his eyes being on her while she walked down the aisle. It suggested that the wedding wasn't entirely about us. I sat back in my chair. When someone reveals their priorities, you feel it in your stomach before your mind catches up. I told myself to stay calm long enough to understand the shape of what I was seeing. I asked her why she needed him there, not the sanitized version she was giving me, but the real reason. She repeated that the wedding would feel incomplete without him. She said it like it was unquestionable. She didn't realize the insult baked into that word. Incomplete. As if my presence, our vows, our future together were decorative pieces around a central emotional target. I watched her gesture confidently across the table, pointing at other names on the list and explaining how the seating arrangement would shift. She never once looked at me as if she understood how her request landed. Instead, she talked about how Calvin always acted superior at work, how she wanted him to see she wasn't the insecure girl he dated. She used the word see so many times that the pattern became unmistakable. This wasn't healing. This was performance. And I was the stage she planned to stand on. A quiet question formed in my mind as she rambled. Was this entire engagement built on love, or was I a convenient vehicle for the image she wanted to project? I didn't interrupt her. I let her talk while the pieces rearranged themselves on their own. When she finally asked if I had any objections, I said I needed air. She assumed I needed space to think. She didn't realize I had already made a decision the moment she said the wedding stopped making sense without him. It revealed everything she had been hiding behind politeness and gratitude. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without saying much else. She called after me, but I acted like I didn't hear. The hallway felt long, almost unfamiliar, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. I didn't drive far, just enough to sit somewhere quiet, process the shift, and stop pretending I didn't know the truth. Marina wanted a spectacle, a moment to display success to someone who once dismissed her, and she viewed me as a resource to produce that spectacle. The money I spent wasn't support. It was her investment into a curated image. When I finally drove to the venue's office, the sun was already low. I spoke with the coordinator, a woman who had spent months helping us assemble every detail. I told her to cancel everything. She looked surprised but didn't pry. The refunds wouldn't be full, but I didn't care. Anything I lost financially would be cheaper than marrying someone who measured our relationship by how it would look to a man who didn't want her. I canceled the catering next, then the florist, then the hotel block. The honeymoon cancellation fee was large, but when I clicked the final confirmation, I felt something inside me settle. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. When I returned home, Marina wasn't there. Her bag and coat were gone, so I assumed she was out with friends or maybe venting to her parents. I didn't wait up. I showered, lay down, and let exhaustion take me without deliberation. At some point during the night, my phone began vibrating nonstop. I ignored it the first few times. But by morning, I saw the screen filled with notifications, 68 missed calls, messages stacked into long threads. The early ones demanded to know why I left without talking. The next ones grew frantic, accusing, then desperate. The final message carried none of the emotional flailing of the others. It read like the last card she had left to play. She wrote that if I wasn't willing to act like a man and handle conflict maturely, she would go back to Calvin because at least he never ran away. Understanding hit me immediately. She expected that threat to scare me into returning to the path she wanted. She believed I would panic at the thought of losing her to the man she supposedly outgrew. She believed the suggestion alone would restore her power. But instead of fear, I felt a quiet confirmation that I had acted correctly, not because she threatened to leave, but because she assumed Calvin was waiting for her. She genuinely thought she had leverage on both sides. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was Lori, a co-worker of Marina's I barely knew beyond casual greetings. She explained, gently, almost apologetically, that Calvin had never shown interest in Marina since their breakup. He never flirted with her, never tried to reconnect, never hinted at wanting her back. In fact, according to Lori, he found Marina's attempts at rekindling conversations uncomfortable. She said Marina frequently exaggerated their connection and acted like Calvin's quiet politeness was proof he wanted her again. Hearing that snapped everything into place. Marina didn't want Calvin back. She wanted him to regret letting her go. She wanted him to watch her float across the aisle on my budget. She wanted the kind of symbolic triumph that only works if the ex actually cares. Except he didn't. He had moved on. She was performing a story that only existed in her mind. And I had been paying for the stage. I thanked Lori, hung up, and understood exactly where the next part of this disaster was heading. Marina wasn't going to accept losing the wedding, the attention, or the fantasy she had built around it. The collapse hadn't reached its peak yet. It was only beginning. The morning after Lori's call, I realized Marina hadn't come home. I didn't bother messaging her. I already knew any conversation would twist into something unrecognizable the moment it left my mouth. Instead, I made coffee, opened the blinds, and let myself sit in the new silence of an apartment that suddenly belonged only to me. A few months earlier, that silence would have felt wrong. Now it felt like oxygen. By mid-morning, the quiet broke. Not from my phone, but from the elevator dinging down the hall. The footsteps were fast, sharp, angry. When the knocking started, it rattled the door harder than necessary. I opened it because delaying would only drag things out. Marina stood there with the kind of expression people wear when they've rehearsed a speech and plan to perform it straight through, no matter what the audience thinks. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes slightly red, but her posture was firm. She pushed past me into the apartment without waiting to be invited. The entitlement in that small gesture told me everything about her mindset. She began pacing, gesturing dramatically, launching into an explanation about why she overreacted the night before and why my unannounced disappearance hurt her. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed her version of reality was the true one. She said I was immature for walking out and that the wedding planning had been overwhelming for her. She said Calvin being at the ceremony was symbolic and I should have understood that if I really cared about her emotional growth. I let her talk because it was clearer than interrupting her. She wasn't apologizing. She was recentering herself as the wronged party so she could climb back into the position where she controlled the narrative. She paused only when she glanced at the kitchen counter and saw the stack of cancellation confirmations printed and neatly clipped together. Venue, catering, decor, photographer, honeymoon. Every page with a refund calculation beside it. For a moment, I saw the surface crack. Then she lunged for the papers like she could reverse them by touching them. You didn't do this. She said it slowly, like she was testing the solidity of the words. Then she read the cancellations, flipping each page faster than the last, her breathing changing from disbelief to something sharper. She wasn't sad. She wasn't hurt. She was furious because her vision, the curated spectacle she had built in her mind, was collapsing. Years of effort poured into impressing the people around her, particularly the man who didn't care, suddenly vanished. She turned to me with her jaw tight and asked why I'd do something so dramatic. Dramatic. Canceling a wedding I was funding entirely so she could flaunt herself to an ex she still wanted emotional validation from. Was dramatic? The urge to laugh rose, but I kept it inside. I told her I canceled everything because I refused to build a wedding around someone who wasn't fully committed to the person beside her. I told her fixation on proving something to Calvin revealed a priority I wouldn't compete with. I told her I didn't want my future dependent on someone chasing validation from a man who had already dismissed her. She didn't take that well. Within seconds, she shifted into attack mode. She accused me of being insecure. She accused me of trying to embarrass her. She claimed she only wanted Calvin there so she could finally heal, as though healing required an audience and 6-tier wedding cakes. The entire exchange felt like watching someone rearrange pieces on a board they didn't realize I'd already stopped playing on. When she realized her accusations weren't landing, she switched tactics. She tried to negotiate. She said we could reinstate everything. She said she would apologize publicly to the guests if that would make me feel better. She said she could pretend Calvin didn't exist. Every sentence revealed something new about how she thought relationships functioned. Performance first, sincerity last. But none of her promises mattered anymore. At some point, she stopped bargaining with me and turned toward her phone. I watched the shift on her face as she opened her messages and tried calling Calvin. Her voice dropped into that forced casual tone she used when trying to sound unaffected. She left a voicemail saying something vague about talking things through. Then she sent 3 messages back to back. He didn't respond. She tried again. Still nothing. She went to the bathroom, probably to collect herself or hide the humiliation of calling a man she believed was secretly waiting for her only to be ignored. When she returned, she tried to reassert control by pacing around the apartment, muttering that everything could be fixed, that I needed to stop being emotional, that she could turn this around. She genuinely believed the universe would rearrange itself if she spoke confidently enough. While she paced, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lori again. She apologized for involving herself, but said she thought I should know that Calvin walked into work earlier that morning annoyed because Marina had blown up his phone. He told coworkers he wanted nothing to do with her and found her dramatic. He had no interest in being part of her life, let alone her wedding. The contrast between Marina's imagined story and reality felt almost surreal. I didn't show her the message. I didn't need to. Her growing panic already confirmed she couldn't reach Calvin. That was enough. Eventually, she stopped pacing and stood across from me with a forced calm that made her look like she was holding onto the edge of a ledge. She asked what I wanted from her. Not in the soft, sincere way someone asks how to repair something. In the irritated way someone asks for a password they forgot. I told her I wanted the truth about why she needed Calvin there. She hesitated too long. That was its own answer. Then she gave a carefully polished explanation about how Calvin was important to her development, how she wanted to reclaim her confidence, how she thought seeing her move on with someone stable would help her close the last emotional chapter. Each sentence sounded like something she practiced in the mirror, something she thought intelligent people say during therapy sessions. But beneath all the layered justifications, the real message was simple. She wanted him to see what she had become. And the person she had become was not a partner. She was a performer preparing for her biggest show. When I didn't respond to her explanation, she grew irritated again. She said I was overreacting and that a mature man would understand the psychology behind her request. She said weddings are symbolic, and she deserved to feel powerful on her day. Powerful. Not loved. Not committed. Not united. Powerful. I finally understood the depth of her motivation. She wasn't marrying me to build a future. She was marrying me to display her rise. Her entire life operated on comparison. She needed people, especially Calvin, to see her as someone they underestimated. And I was the vehicle that made the transformation believable. When the realization hit her that this transformation wouldn't happen because the wedding was canceled, she snapped. She said Calvin might be willing to talk to her if she explained the situation. She said he would understand. She said he'd always been drawn to her when she was in demand. The delusion sat so firmly in her mind that reasoning with her felt pointless. She stormed out of the apartment before I could say anything else. The door slammed hard enough to shake a picture frame on the wall. I didn't follow her. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up small things, removing the wedding binder from the table, placing the cancellation documents in a folder, sorting out which items in the apartment were hers. It was grounding to rearrange objects while my mind processed the collapse of something I had thought would last. Around evening, I got another unexpected call, this time from Marina's mother, who demanded to know why I canceled the wedding. Her tone held no curiosity, only accusation. Marina had told her parents that I had a sudden breakdown and ran away from responsibility. She said I refused to communicate and sabotage the entire event out of fear of commitment. The speed of the lie didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how easily her mother believed it. I didn't argue. I simply told her to ask Marina why Calvin needed to be invited. There was a long pause. She asked who Calvin was. When I heard the confusion in her voice, I understood that Marina had never told her parents anything about him. The day after Marina stormed out, The atmosphere shifted into something that felt less like a breakup and more like the unraveling of a stage production where the lead actress suddenly discovered the audience had left. What remained was a frantic attempt to drag people back into their seats before the curtain fell. By early afternoon, the fallout had already begun ripple through her circles. I got a text from Nell, a mutual acquaintance who occasionally invited us to group dinners. She said Marina had been messaging everyone, claiming I sabotaged the wedding due to emotional instability and unresolved fears. She framed herself as the patient fiancée who tried to help me, but couldn't carry the burden alone. It would have made me laugh if it wasn't so transparent. Marina didn't deal in truth. She dealt in whichever version of events gave her the highest ground at the moment. Still, hearing that she weaponized my supposed fragility confirmed one thing. She was preparing a story to survive whatever came next. I didn't respond to Nell. There was nothing to clarify. Truth doesn't need speed. Lies do. Around evening, something unexpected happened, something that pulled the story forward faster than anything I could have predicted. Calvin called me. Not a text. Not a forwarded message. An actual call. His name on my screen felt surreal. I answered because avoiding it would only prolong whatever storm Marina was dragging him into. His voice sounded tired, not hostile. He told me he didn't want to be involved in my relationship drama, but he needed to make something clear. Marina had shown up at his workplace that morning. Unannounced. Loud. Emotional. She demanded to know why he wasn't answering her messages. She cornered him in the lobby, telling him I was mentally unstable and accusing him of influencing me to cancel the wedding. People gathered. Someone stepped between them. Calvin kept repeating he wanted distance. He said her behavior crossed a line. She insisted he owed her closure since he once walked away without giving her a reason. He told her the past was over. She refused to accept that. And then, the moment that shifted everything, she told him the real reason she wanted him at the wedding. Not for closure, not for healing, but because she wanted him to see how far she'd come. She wanted him to witness her success. She wanted him to regret leaving her. Calvin told me he didn't say any of this to embarrass me. He just needed me to understand that he had no part in whatever fantasy she was building. He said he blocked her number permanently after she left. He apologized for calling, apologized for being dragged into this, apologized for her behavior. The sincerity in his voice surprised me. I could hear the exhaustion behind it. Exhaustion from being woven into someone's imaginary narrative without consent. After we hung up, I sat on the couch staring at nothing. The truth wasn't a shock anymore, but hearing it confirmed from the man she swore still had feelings for her twisted the knife in a different way. Marina had constructed an entire identity around proving something to a man who didn't even dislike her. He simply didn't see her at all. She wasn't chasing love. She was chasing a spotlight that didn't exist. I expected Marina to come home eventually, but she didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. Instead, I received calls from her friends asking what was going on, asking why the wedding website suddenly displayed a cancellation notice, asking why Marina's family group chat had exploded. It became clear that she wasn't telling people the same story. She was tailoring different versions to different audiences to see which one would stick. To her friends, I was unstable. To her parents, I was uncommunicative. To Calvin, I was toxic and controlling. To coworkers, she was the victim of a sudden abandonment. But the stories were already cracking because people talk. And when lies travel in multiple directions, they eventually meet. The real shift came the following afternoon. Marina showed up again, but this time she didn't knock. She used her key. When she entered, she tried to act composed, but her eyes kept flashing with something raw and desperate. She carried herself like someone who had just experienced a humiliation she couldn't hide from. I guess Calvin's rejection wasn't quiet, and I guess she wasn't expecting her coworkers to witness it. She placed her phone on the counter with a dramatic finality and announced she wanted to fix things. But something in her voice shook, barely noticeable, like the beginning of a crack spreading through glass. She said she realized she had been caught up in stress. She said the wedding pressure had warped her priorities. She said she didn't mean to overemphasize the symbolism. Every line was polished, rehearsed, spoken with the cadence of someone who wanted her performance to land cleanly. But the performance didn't match her eyes. She looked terrified, not of losing me, but of losing the life she curated around being with me. The apartment, the vacations, the financial security, the wedding she treated as a public rebranding. She said she deleted Calvin's number. She said she understood how things looked. She said we could rebuild the event. She even suggested a smaller ceremony to reconnect emotionally. It would have been convincing to someone who didn't know her. But I had spent years observing how she navigated uncomfortable truths. Redirect, polish, perform, hide. Instead of responding, I asked her why she told her mother I had a breakdown. That question caught her off guard. She blinked once, twice, then attempted a soft, trembled excuse that didn't fit the situation. She said she panicked and didn't know how to explain the cancellations. She said she thought her mother would blame her for it. I asked her why she confronted Calvin at work. Her expression tightened again, that slight twitch near her mouth when she knew the truth trapped her. She claimed she only wanted clarity. She claimed he misunderstood her. She claimed she wasn't trying to revive anything. I watched her unravel in slow motion as she ran out of justifications. Then she made a critical mistake. She asked if we could reset the narrative. She said we didn't need to tell people what actually happened. She said we could say the cancellation was a mutual decision and then reschedule. She said this setback could actually strengthen the brand of our relationship. Brand. The word hit me harder than any insult she could have thrown. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for participation in rewriting reality. She wanted me to help rebuild the facade she performed for the world. At that moment, I realized she didn't understand I was already gone. Physically present, yes. But emotionally, I had left the second she told me the wedding made no sense without her ex. When I didn't respond, she tried a new tactic. She said she knew I felt threatened by Calvin because of his status at work. She said it was natural for a man to compare himself to an ex. She said she could reassure me that she felt secure with me. Her voice wavered only once, when she said secure. Security was all she ever wanted. Not love, not partnership. Security. When I still didn't speak, she snapped. She accused me of throwing away everything because of one misunderstanding. She said I was acting like a child. She said if the roles were reversed, she would have handled things with maturity. She started pacing again, spiraling between anger and panic. She asked if I had spoken to Calvin. She asked what he told me. She asked what I planned to say to her parents. She asked if the vendors could still be restored. She asked if we could delete the cancellation notice. She asked if any of this was reversible. Her questions weren't really questions. They were attempts to stop the freefall she created. When she finally stopped talking, she noticed something she hadn't before. My suitcase was packed, sitting by the hallway. A chill moved across her expression. Not sadness, not heartbreak, recognition. She realized the story was slipping out of her hands. She stepped toward the suitcase like approaching a dangerous ledge. She asked where I was going. I told her I needed space to think. She said thinking was useless. She said what mattered was action. She said we needed to present unity. Present. Another performance term. I picked up the suitcase. I walked past her without touching her. She followed me to the door, saying I was overreacting. She kept insisting the problem was small. She kept saying we could salvage everything. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door. Behind it, I heard her voice break for the first time. Not in grief, in disbelief. I spent the next 2 days at a short-term rental across town. It wasn't glamorous, dated carpet, thin walls, a faint smell of old coffee, but it gave me space to think without Marina's voice filling every corner. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel obligated to play the part she'd silently assigned me. I didn't block her number. Letting her messages pile up in a straight, uninterrupted timeline told me more about her unraveling than any argument could. The tone shifted from demanding explanations, to rehearsed apologies, to sudden bursts of anger, then back to carefully structured pleas. It followed the same cycle every manipulator goes through, bargaining with a narrative rather than facing the truth beneath it. By the third evening, I knew what needed to happen next. Not for revenge, not for theatrics, but because the people she had lied to deserved clarity. The entire collapse wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about the way Marina built her identity using whoever surrounded her, me included, and the damage she caused because of it. So I sent one message. Meet me at your parents' house tomorrow evening. Bring nothing but honesty. She responded within seconds, saying she was relieved I was finally being reasonable, as if the invitation was a sign I intended to fix everything. She didn't understand what was coming. She genuinely thought I was returning to the script. The next day, I arrived early. Her parents welcomed me with cautious politeness. They looked stressed and confused, symptoms of being fed inconsistent stories. I asked them to wait until Marina arrived before I said anything. She walked in 20 minutes later, hairstyled, makeup done, dressed as if the right outfit could reshape an outcome. That was Marina, always treating perception as reality. She smiled at me, a small, rehearsed smile, while taking her seat. Her parents sat beside her. I sat across from them with a folder she hadn't noticed yet. She started speaking immediately, eager to gain control of the room. She told her parents she'd been overwhelmed by wedding pressure, that I had misunderstood her intentions, that the situation was salvageable with the right communication. She said I needed reassurance, and she was ready to provide it. She tried to present herself as the calm one stabilizing the emotional environment. I let her speak for nearly 5 minutes. Then I placed the folder on the table. Her words faltered when she saw her own handwriting through the transparent cover sleeve. Printouts of messages, vendor contracts, cancellation confirmations, and the details she never expected me to gather. Her mother asked what it was. I said it was the truth, not the versions Marina had given each audience, but the actual sequence of events. I started from the beginning. The ex. The guest list. The moment she said the wedding didn't make sense without him. The meaning of that sentence. Her motive behind it. Her fixation on proving something to a man who didn't care. Her use of me as the vehicle for her own image. Her attempt to maintain multiple narratives when confronted. Her visit to Calvin's workplace and her dramatic meltdown in their lobby. Her lies to her parents and friends. Her insistence on resetting the narrative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish anything. I spoke with the calmness of someone done participating in illusions. Marina's parents listened quietly, and with each sentence, their expressions darkened, not with anger at me, but with disappointment in their daughter. They turned to her and asked if what I said was true. She tried to deflect. She said I was twisting things. She said I was exaggerating. She said I was only telling part of the story. But her parents didn't accept vague answers. They pressed her, asking exact questions she couldn't escape from. Finally, her father asked, "Were you using this wedding to impress someone at work?" That was the moment Marina's carefully constructed world fractured. Her eyes flickered with panic. Her chest tightened visibly. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, but no explanation could untangle the truth she had hidden behind my money. Her silence was the answer. Her mother pressed her palm against her forehead, exhaling a long, defeated breath. Her father looked at me with a quiet apology in his eyes. He apologized formally, saying I didn't deserve this situation or the way their daughter had treated me. Marina attempted one more escape. She insisted that people have complicated feelings and that the wedding planning brought up unresolved emotions. She insisted I was misinterpreting everything. She insisted I should have talked to her privately instead of involving her parents. But then another voice joined the conversation, one none of us expected. Calvin. He walked in, invited by me earlier that morning. Marina's face drained of color so fast it looked like she'd been washed empty. She whispered his name as if she'd seen a ghost. But Calvin wasn't there for drama. He was there to tell the truth she'd never admit. He explained that Marina had been chasing his attention for months, exaggerating his politeness into imagined interest. He told her parents about the scene she caused at his workplace, how she'd accused him of interfering, how she'd begged him to validate choices he had no part in. He clarified that he had no romantic feelings for her, no desire to be in her life, and certainly no intention of attending her wedding. He said something that finally broke the last illusion she clung to. She told people I still wanted her. I never did. I never said it. She created a story and tried to pull everyone into it. Marina's breath hitched. She looked at me, then at Calvin, then at her parents, realizing every avenue she once used to maintain power now recognized the truth. Her father stood up, walked out of the room, and didn't come back for 10 minutes. When he did, he told Marina she needed to find another place to live because they wouldn't support a daughter who manipulates and deceives people who cared for her. Her mother quietly agreed. Marina began to tremble, not out of heartbreak, but fear. Fear of losing the stability she built her life around. Fear of losing the financial safety net her parents occasionally provided. Fear of losing the image she projected to coworkers, friends, and even strangers. She looked at me with a trembling voice, finally stripped of performance. She said she messed up. She said she could change. She said we could rebuild everything together. I didn't respond to the emotion. I responded to the logic. I told her a wedding built on performance collapses the moment the audience leaves, and every audience she tried to manipulate was now gone. I handed her the keys to the apartment and told her she had 1 week to collect her belongings. I wasn't renewing the lease with her. She would have to find her own place. She pleaded. Her parents stayed silent. Calvin left without another word. And that was when Marina understood the full scope of her downfall. Not only had she lost the wedding, the man financing her future, the illusion of power over Calvin, and the support of her parents, she had lost the image she curated so aggressively. The scaffolding had been kicked out from under her, and she had nothing to hold on to. I walked out of the house without looking back. That night, while packing the last of my things into the rental, I received one final message from her. I can't believe I'm the one alone. That was the first honest thing she had said in months. 1 month later, I heard through Nell that Marina had moved into a small room she shared with a co-worker after her parents refused to co-sign an apartment. She stopped talking about Calvin entirely. She stopped trying to rebuild her story. She stopped pretending she was above the consequences. As for me, I took the money saved from the canceled wedding and used it to take time off work, breathe, and rebuild my life without someone else's fantasy attached to my wallet. I didn't seek revenge. I just stopped playing the role she wrote for me. And that was enough to collapse everything she built.